Excellent. I was just wondering what qualifies me to do this topic. I do use my green bin at home and the blue one. So the environment. It was interesting. As I was preparing for this talk, there was a BBC News article about Ed Sheeran's Suffolk estate that is going to be under investigation. I don't know if you read it. It was quite interesting because he's basically got this pond that he said he was going to be using for wildlife, and the neighbours are saying actually that he's using it for a wild lifestyle. So this was the article. So Sheeran had previously submitted planning application seeking to get permission for this large pond on his estate. And in his application, he said he had a real desire to encourage wildlife in the area and on his property. However, some of the neighbours submitted a complaint to the authorities, claiming that it wasn't being used to promote wildlife, but to indulge his wild lifestyle. You can just imagine him out there jumping and skinny dipping in his little pond. So reading the article, one of the things that struck me and it highlighted for me, and reading the comments that people were making, is the diversity of opinions when it comes to our view of the environment that we inhabit and how it should be used. There's some really angry people about what he could be doing to the wildlife in the area, and other people just saying, whoa, it's his property, who cares, he can build as many swimming pools as he likes. And when we listen to the debates and discussions over environmental issues, you soon realize that people are on a scale. I guess we're all on a scale. Let's say at this end, you've got the environmental activists, those who really care and campaign and have lifestyles that promote concern and conservation of wildlife. At the farthest end of that, you've got the extreme tree huggers who believe that the life of any individual tree is as valuable as the life of any individual person. And that's a group, a view of many people. The other end, you've got profit-driven corporations. All they care about is money. And at the farthest end of that, you've got a CEO who will happily knock down a rainforest in order to build a new garage for his 30 sports car and a little track to run them around. So you've got this kind of scale, and you've got people at either end of the scale, and we'll all fall along there somewhere. Now let's say the middle of the road person doesn't do anything sort of proactively to damage or destroy the planet. In their mind, they're not going out of their way to do it, but neither do they go out of their way to proactively do anything to promote or protect the environment that they inhabit. Some people will be more to this side, in this direction, keen recyclers, solar panels on their roofs. As soon as the electric car came out, they invested in one because they believe that's right, so they're on that direction. Then some people will be more in the other direction, dumping perfectly good items just because they've had them for a year, leaving the lights on, the TV on, everything on, driving their 4x4 100 meters to just drop the kids off at the school gate. So you've got these people on this scale. So we all have a vested interest, don't we, in the environment that we inhabit, but how much interest we actually take varies enormously. Where would you place yourself on the scale? Where do you think you are in relation to how you think about the environment? Because I guess we're all on that scale somewhere. And then you've got to ask the question, what actually motivates you? So then you're on the scale, what motivates you to take that point of view and to act in a certain way? So David Attenborough, he's stirred up many hearts when it comes to the environment through the TV series Planet Earth and Blue Planet. Apparently after these things aired, there was a huge kind of swell and a sort of spike in schools being concerned over environmental issues, people looking about things that they could do. And as one of my friends said after he'd watched it, he boasted to me, Scott, I never put my 6-ring can thing now in the bin without cutting it up. okay, because nobody wants to see a sea turtle like that. So it did actually have an impact on some people, and they start thinking about various ways that they live. I don't know if it went much further for him, but certainly that was one thing that he felt convicted by and is obviously emotionally drawn in. But the question to ask, and then what I thought about my friend, given that he's got this massive motorbike and a sports car, is how far do we go? Are there just little things to appease our conscience or when we think about the environment? So what motivates us? So allow me to sketch the situation when it comes to environmental concerns, and I'm grateful to Jesse, our zoologist, who's been helping me with some of this research. There's now more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than ever before. Climate change is considered to be the number one issue by scientists. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in small quantities is good. It prevents the Earth from freezing, slowly releases heat. However, the amount in the atmosphere at the moment is leading to extreme weather across the globe. And in conjunction with this is the ocean acidification, which lowers the pH of the ocean. So there's major things going on outside of, the David Attenborough thing was plastic in the ocean, and we all feel guilty about that, but there are bigger issues at stake. So let me give you some quick facts on climate change. The Earth has warmed by 1%. Animals are moving northwards as seas become warmer, leading to invasive species taking over other species' grounds, poor fishing crops, shrinking ice sheets. 127 billion tons of ice has been lost between 1993 and 2016. The rate of ice mass loss has tripled in the last decade, and the sea levels have risen by 8 inches in the last century. Ocean acidification, acidity of surface waters is increased by around 30%. And this can affect various organisms in the sea, some of them that rely on those things for their sense of smell, so they're losing their sense of smell, which is having knock-on effect throughout the ocean. And extreme weather events. The number of record high temperatures has been increasing, while the number of record low temperatures events have been decreasing since 1950. So many countries, we see it on the news all the time, have witnessed increasing number of intense rainfall events. So it would appear that you would have to be willfully blind, scientifically speaking, to miss the impact that humanity is having on the globe, on the earth, and the environment and that we inhabit. So the big question is, why don't we do something about it? I mean, we're all doing little bits, but why is there really no mass movement from people? Now, in order to get us thinking about how we interact with this, I'd like to share a quote with you from a film called Tomorrowland, starring George Clooney, which really, in essence, is a film about whether we actually care about the world we live in. What's happening in the film, basically, give you the plot line. So these major scientists from the world decided to go off and start another place called Tomorrowland, a real world somewhere else, because they saw that the world was going to rack and ruin. When they developed this other place, they also developed this machine that was able to see into the future. And so they got the date for the Earth's demise, and they knew it. George Clooney used to be part of that. He left, but he knows when the Earth is going to end. So these bright new people who went off, and knowing that the Earth was doomed, were trying to help the Earth. So in this quote, Governor Nix, played by Hugh Laurie, he's the leader of Tomorrowland, and he speaks because they're basically trying to blame Tomorrowland for everything. And then he speaks about the nature of humanity. So it's a lengthy quote, but listen to it because I think it will really get us to the heart of things as we move forward. So he says, let's imagine if you glimpsed the future and you were frightened by what you saw, what would you do with that information? The probability of widespread annihilation just kept going up. The only way to stop it was to show it, to scare people straight, because what reasonable human being wouldn't be galvanized by the potential destruction of everything they've ever known or loved? To save civilization, we would show its collapse. How do you think this vision was received? How do you think the people responded to the prospect of imminent doom? They gobbled it up like a chocolate eclair. They didn't fear their demise, they repackaged it. It could be enjoyed as video games, TV shows, books, movies. The entire world wholeheartedly embraced the apocalypse and sprinted towards it with gleeful abandon. Meanwhile, your earth was crumbling all around you. You've got simultaneous epidemics of obesity and starvation. Explain that one. Bees and butterflies start to disappear. The glaciers melt, algae blooms. All around you, the coal mine canaries are dropping dead, but you just won't take the hint. In every moment, there's a possibility of a better future, but you people won't believe it. And because you won't believe it, you don't want to do what's necessary to make it a reality. They dwell on this terrible future, and you resign yourselves to it for one reason, because that future doesn't ask anything of you today. So yes, we saw the iceberg coming, and yes, we warned the Titanic, but you all just steered for it anyway, full steam ahead. Why? Because you want to sink. You gave up. That's not the monitor's fault. That's your fault. The monitor's the thing that has seen what's going to happen in the future. Now, I think the thing about Nick's speech that's a bit unnerving and hits a nerve with the viewer is that he asks, what responsibility do we take for the environment in which we inhabit? And he basically, his thing at the end is that it's hopeless for humanity because they won't ever do what's necessary to change. There's no motivational power within them. There are many reasons why people want to conserve nature, look after the planet Earth. You've got my friend who emotionally just feels bad about that sea turtle that he saw. Some people just like the Earth, they enjoy it. Personally, they want to protect their little environment so that they can continue to have the life that they've enjoyed. Others have a desire that the world be preserved for future generations. They just have this sense that their children and grandchildren should be able to enjoy and benefit from the earth. Still others just love the earth for its own sake, just seeing inherent beauty and wonder, and they think we should protect that and preserve that. But I do believe that Governor Nick's speech was spot on in questioning actually whether that has enough motivational power to actually bring about change in people. So what I want to focus on for the rest of my time is whether belief in God, and particularly the Christian worldview, provides a powerful narrative and stimulant for caring for the environment. So whether the Christian worldview has got anything to add that other things don't seem to. I'm going to speak about three basic principles that you find in the Bible. Three basic principles when it comes to what you might call a Christian environmental ethic. So the first principle is this: God created and therefore values all his work of creation. That's the principle of creation value. God created and sustains all elements and systems in his creation within particular orders to meet ongoing purposes. That's called the principle of sustained order and purpose. And then number three, everything in the created world and universe is subject to corruption by sin and ultimate redemption through Jesus Christ. That's the principle of universal corruption and redemption, and we'll work through those three. Now, what these three principles, is show us God's attitude to the world, and therefore what a Christian's attitude to the world should be. So the principle of creation value, that first recognizes that God created the heavens and the earth. God created all that was in them. You read about that in the opening chapters of the Bible, in some of the Psalms. But at the end of the Bible, in Revelation chapter 4, it says this: you are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being. So the Bible teaches that God created everything. and that he allows people to utilize elements of the environment, but God retains absolute ownership over his creation. So, for example, one of the Psalms in the middle of the Bible states, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it." So the first thing that the principle of creation value teaches us is that the earth doesn't belong to us. It belongs to God. And the Bible teaches that God loves and enjoys what he's created. So an implication of the principle of creation value from an ethical standpoint is that God places value on elements of the environment irrespective of human use, irrespective of how humans value it. Now, this God-centered inherent value in nature is termed theistic intrinsic value. So it has intrinsic value because God created it. So much like nowadays, if you have a famous sculptor or artist, if they create something, a sculpture or a work of art, it has an intrinsic value now because it's attached to them. So let's just say, for example, we had two identical rings. It's called the dignity of value that comes from ownership. Let's say we have two identical rings made by the same person, made from the same stuff. Let's say I own one of those rings for 40 years, and I die, and then Queen Elizabeth II owns one of those rings for 40 years, and she dies. Okay, which ring is of most value if it went to auction? The one that Queen Elizabeth owned, irrespective of the same, because the value comes from the dignity of the one who owned it. Creation has an intrinsic value, not because of what creation is like, but because of the dignity of the one who created it and who owns it. Okay, so that's one of the principles of created value. Now, it's worth saying that this is not always, we live with this kind of view in the West. That's that we live with this kind of intrinsic value of the environment. But that's not always been the predominant view. So Plato's philosophy that influenced the Gnostic view of the physical world took a very different approach. So followers of Gnosticism taught that the spiritual world contained everything that was good, and the physical or material world contained everything that was bad. Now, can you see from that point of view, under Gnosticism, according to that philosophy, nature would have a negative value. Therefore, you could do or treat it any way that you liked. Because as this picture shows, if you don't get it, you're trying to picture this, the man is trying to escape from the physical, escape from the material, because that's bad, in order to move to the spiritual, because that is good. Now, this position, therefore, the predominant idea for many cultures, has a very low value on the physical and the material. So you could abuse the environment you live in because it's bad. It doesn't count for anything. And then Christianity comes along and starts changing this mindset. But there is another extreme position that's worth talking about as well, an extreme position on the value and importance of the physical world, and that is one that elevates the status of nature to being of equal value even to people. So this is pictured here where you've got people say, oh yeah, if you put man at the top, if you say that he has more value than everybody else, that's egotistical. Okay, but if you just say that everybody is just part of the same thing, then intrinsically everybody has the same value, then that's you're in eco. Okay, so in modern times, a certain secular environmental ethics or philosophies called deep ecology teach that everything in nature has equal status and value. Okay. Now, the principle of creation value that comes from the Christian worldview will have nothing to do with either of those extremes. Okay, it won't say the material is bad because God created it and declared it to be good, but nor will it say that everything within creation is of equal value because that is not what God has said. In fact, the Bible teaches that God values nature and he places a special value on people, where it says again in one of the Psalms, Psalms 8, that speaking of humanity, that God crowned them with glory and honor as the climax of his creative work. So the Christian values the physical world because it belongs to God and he values it. So belief in God becomes a powerful motivation to be a responsible caretaker, steward of nature, one who does not abuse or misuse what God has given us as a gift to enjoy and to use. But at the same time, belief in the Creator God also demands that we don't elevate anything in creation either above God himself, nor do we put humanity on a par with other creatures because God has given us a special place on the earth. So let me move on to the second principle, the principle of sustained order and purpose. The principle of sustained order and purpose. So God originally created all the elements of the environment to fit and function together in an ordered way, an orderly fashion, within interrelated, integrated systems to meet certain ongoing purposes. So God's direct involvement in the natural system didn't end after he originally created as described in the opening chapters of Genesis, but God continually holds everything together, sustains the function of the natural order, accomplishing what is intended for each of those orders and with a purpose for both non-living and living elements in the environment and the environmental systems. So one of the things that is established in the opening chapters of the Bible is that God creates in an ordered way. He actually takes chaos and orders it. And we can see that, and the more that science discovers about the world, the more we discover about how ordered it is and how interrelated it is. And God created these systems and continues, his hands-on continues to sustain these systems. So God created and sustains all of creation with its particular orders, its systems, to meet intended purposes. Now, the first large-scale ordering of interest in the Bible is the biblical hierarchy between God, people, and nature. And understanding and thinking and getting our heads around this and applying it, a Christian environmental ethic requires a proper understanding and interpretation of those biblical passages that describe this hierarchy. And it's first stated in Genesis 1:28 that says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over every living creature that moves on the ground. So Genesis 1:28 establishes that God's basic order of creation, that he's created people to have dominion over nature. However, Genesis 1:28 also clearly states that people are also creations of God. So they're over the rest of nature, but under God. As creations of God, we're under his authority and dominion. So from the perspective of God's authority and control, people and nature are in the same class and order. All of creation, including people, must submit to God's plans and ways and systems, but they're part of the created order. But then there's a fundamental separation between God and all that he has created, including people, because he is the uncreated. Okay, so there's order in creation. But then there's a God-ordained separation within creation that I spoke of earlier, where people are placed above the rest of the animal kingdom because they're crowned with glory and honor. So people are above nature, but not above nature by some kind of evolutionary fluke. They're not above nature because we somehow managed to climb or grapple according to our own power and ingenuity to get to this place. No, we didn't climb here. God placed us here, and he placed us here for a purpose. God created people in his image to exercise dominion over nature, a godly dominion over nature. That means that we would be stewards, caretakers of nature with ultimate responsibility to God for how we use, how we manage that environment. Therefore, Christians are compelled, knowing this, believing this, to ensure that the orders, patterns, and systems are maintained just as God intended. They will be seeking to maintain the order that God has embedded in creation. So in summary, the good steward, as we might call them, according to the Bible, will manage nature in a wise, self-controlled, non-wasteful manner, always taking care to sustain the original functions of the elements of the environment. Why? Because of God values creation and because of the principle of sustained order. God is sustaining the orders and systems, and we, under him, should do the same. But a poor steward, in contrast, lacks self-control, is wasteful, irresponsible, and cannot be trusted to take proper care of what he or she has been put in charge of managing. Now, let me put it like this, to try and summarize these first 2 points. If you buy your own home, you purchase it outright, it belongs to you. And if you decide to trash your home, if you decide to create structures and create an environment in your home that is not very healthy to you, and maybe even damaging to your health, in some respect, that's entirely up to you. It's your home. You've purchased it. It belongs to you. If you want to live in squalor and build a home that is not conducive to good health, and that's up to you. But it's another thing altogether when you live in rented property that comes with a tenancy agreement, that comes with an agreement that says that you have to order your life in a certain way because there are expectations from the owner about how you will value their property and how you will use it. Now, the atheistic worldview tells us that the earth is our home. It will probably try to compel us to say that we share it with others, and we've got this freedom to use the earth as our home, to order it well, and to look after it. So they would encourage that. But the question is, why? Why would you do that? And what motivational power is there to do that? Because if in essence we've climbed to the top of the food chain purely by chance through the evolutionary process and we've got to the top, what motivational power is there not to abuse it, use it, how we see fit for this time? Whereas the Christian worldview tells us that the earth belongs to God, we're just tenants, and so we're duty-bound to look after it and to approach it in the way that he has ordered it, because he is the owner. So that's the first 2 principles. The final principle is the principle of universal corruption and redemption. Now, it's pretty obvious to all of us that who have observed the world for any meaningful length of time, that while the world is full of beauty and wonder, it also contains a lot of ugliness and destruction. Now, the atheistic worldview, again, would simply state, well, that's just the way things are. There's no reason, there's no rhyme to it, it just is. Don't ask why, don't even cry, just try to make the best of what it is. It is what it is, get on with it. But the Christian worldview has an alternative explanation, which isn't so neutral, but it is a lot more hopeful. The Bible is clear that man and woman, and particularly man and woman's rejection of God that's described in the early chapters of the Bible, has plunged the world into this paradox of being both full of good and evil, where we enjoy the environment in which we live in, where we abuse it, where we enjoy other people and where we abuse them. As people, we have the capacity for both great creativity and then huge destructiveness. And we have this paradox that we see: beauty and ugliness, good and evil, creativity and destructiveness. And that rebellious nature, that rejection of God that the Bible calls sin, forms into seeds of personal destruction, environmental destruction, because at core, we've turned in on ourselves and become selfish, rejecting God's order and instead deciding on our own order. Now, just think of it from a simple point of view. If God is at the top and he's decided the order and is telling everybody what to do, and if everybody listens and he knows best, then things are going to go well. But if you have 7 billion people deciding that they all know best, they know how to govern their lives best, they know how to govern the world best, but those 7 billion people don't agree, then and they're turned in on themselves, then how are they ever going to be able to promote the protection of the environment or even their own lives? Now, there's so much talk, as I've said, and watched plenty of programs only the last few weeks looking into this, about lifting the environment out of the bondage to which humanity has subjected it. And I don't think we can disagree or argue against the fact that humanity has subjected the environment to bondage in many areas and different ways. But let me ask a question. What about the bondage that humanity itself is subject to? And would it be even possible to lift the environment and the earth out of its bondage if humanity has not been lifted out of their bondage? And that's where the wonderful message of the Bible comes in, and the wonderful life of Jesus Christ, who came, the Bible says, to rescue people from their bondage to sin and to be a liberator of the whole earth. Humanity and the whole of creation has been corrupted and polluted by human sin. And we personally can't do anything to clean up the mess, no matter how hard we try and how many conventions we have and how many nations club together. The harmony that once existed between God and humanity has been broken. The harmony that once existed between humanity and the rest of creation has been damaged. It's in tatters. And it seems to me that only Christianity has an answer to both the individual human mess and the corruption of the world. And one place that speaks of this answer really clearly is Romans chapter 8, where it says this. It says, this is Paul, one of Jesus' followers, writing to Christians. He says, I consider that our present sufferings, so this is the present sufferings of Christians, are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. So that's a language of liberation, isn't it? For the creation, that's the rest of the creation, waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. So the creation is expecting something. For the creation was subject to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in the hope that creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. So there's a recognition of bondage and a recognition that it needs to be liberated and will be. He continues, we know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth. Well, we know the earth is groaning, doesn't it? Right up to this present time. Not only so, but we ourselves, and this is Christians, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. So the Christian message is that the world is in bondage. People are in bondage. But liberation and redemption is what God has accomplished and promised through Jesus Christ for humanity and for the rest of creation. So God is not so much into recycling as into making all things new, perfecting and restoring things in his Son. The current state of the world cries out in a loud voice that harmony and order have been lost. And only Jesus can restore that harmony and order. And he does that through the work of the redemption to buy back what's been in bondage and to make it new. Jesus is the one who restores a right relationship between God and humanity, and between humanity and the rest of creation. And so we're told in the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, that God will create a new heaven and a new earth, which will not only surpass this earth's current corruption and its corrupt end, but it will also surpass the original creation's magnificent beginnings. In this new creation of God, both people and nature will be free from the bondage and the sufferings caused by sin and its effects on the world that we live in today, including death and decay and all those things that go along with it. People and nature will no longer be battling against each other, as we so often is the case with our current physical environment. No, there will be harmony. It's the language of harmony. So let me finish by saying the Bible describes Christians as a new creation in Christ. That's what it says of Christians. They're a new creation in Christ. Our minds and our thinking are renewed in many areas of our lives. And in the area of our environmental stewardship, a deep personal understanding of the way God loves and sustains all of his creation gives Christian people a proper perspective on our love and care and purpose for the environment we inhabit. And this understanding, when taken to heart, and these three principles start to transform how we view and carry out our God-given role as Christian environmental stewards or caretakers of God's world. So I would offer this evening that no other world view gives such a compelling and motivational approach to caring for our physical environment as what you find in the Bible from Christianity.
We've got a few questions to discuss, so we'll make a start now. So, the first question then. How do you explain the idea that most Christians don't seem to care that much about ecology, etc., and most people who do care have an atheistic worldview?
Right. Well, it's a sort of good question, I think. But I'm just wondering. Well, what I mean by that is, I think I would question the sort of premise, really, whether that is in fact the case. That seems to be assuming so. Certainly, historically, it is the case that when you read, for instance, the 16th century reformer John Calvin, in his commentary on Genesis, for instance, he's got a fantastic section in there which could have been written. It's the basis for green ecology. That the earth is the Lord's. Adam was put in a garden to take care of it. The language actually used there in Genesis and the Garden of Eden is worship language. That part of the whole worshipping of God is by caring for the garden in which he's been placed. I studied what was then called sort of biogeography and it was ecology, basically, environmental studies at Hull University in the 70s. And some of the leading ecologists were Christians. So one of the leading ones was Professor Roland Moss, who'd written a very fine term on the Christian responsibility for the environment. And also La Roche's a special Christian environmental center. So I would question whether it is in fact the case that Christians don't seem to care. Some Christians don't seem to care, but they're wrong, and they should care because, as we've heard tonight, this is God's creation. We are stewards. We're meant to care for it under him, and so glorify him in doing that. Atheists care for it. Of course, some atheists do care for it, care for the world, and are very much involved in the forefront of environmental concerns and trying to improve things. But I can also think of atheists who don't care. So what does that prove? What I would ask, though, is whether, in fact, an atheist, by which we mean, say, a thoroughgoing naturalistic materialist, that is, somebody who does not believe there's any spiritual dimension or transcendent dimension to reality, has a reason for caring. What would the motivation be? The world has come from nowhere. Eventually, the whole universe is going to collapse and is going to end up as nothing. We are only a mere speck of a speck of a speck of a speck on this speck of the planet. And we are latecomers, even in the whole, sort of, the Earth is, 4.3 billion years old or whatever it is, and we are certainly the latecomers. Dinosaurs have died out, lots of other species have died out. Why shouldn't we die out? So I would want to ask my naturalistic atheist friends, what motivation do they have to actually improve things? As a Christian, I've got a reason, because this is God's creation, it's not mine. I'm meant to look after it and encourage other people to do the same and use whatever science and so on we have to forward the enterprise.
And I think on that as well, I think it was about 5 years ago, I remember telling you, Melvin, I read this book. It was written by an Indian professor, educated in America, and he was talking about how different things developed. Really interesting things, just like the bit and bridle for a horse and things like that. And he said he was tracing a number of various things, windmills, bits and bridles, and his point was you could find all these things were invented in different places around the world where Christianity had not touched. But nobody would take them on widespread. Why? Because often they were only relieving the burden of animals. So why did anybody care? Where did they actually get taken on? In the monasteries in Europe under Christian monks, that they got hold of these inventions and saying, well, if this will make the work of a donkey easier, if this will lighten the burden of a particular beast of burden, then we should do it because we have a Christian duty to do it. So it's a very interesting book, just looking at various aspects of the development of various things around the world in different ages and who it was who took them on, even though they weren't the people to invent them. There was just no motivational power in the places where they were invented to actually use them and bring them into things. Because why pay money and cut into your profit to make a donkey's life easier? Well, you won't if you're in the Middle East or if you're out in India, but you might if you're in Europe in a monastery, because you've got this compulsion of belief about animals and our care for them, and therefore you might start getting some traction. So that's, I was trying to remember what the book's called. It's on my Kindle, so I'll be able to find it for you, but it's a very interesting read.
Okay. Next question then. This is regarding a Christian worldview of care for the environment. And sort of you talked about the scales, Scott. We've got the CEO on one side and the extreme environmentalists on the other end. Here's the question here. Where is the line or balance between a godly stewarding of the creation that's been given us and idolizing creation and taking this whole idea to the wrong extreme on that end, if you like, of the scale?
So where is the balance? So when I said about the extreme, so the tree hugger, remember what I said about the tree hugger is it was because it wasn't just about a tree hugger, it was about their thought process, that the tree has equal value to a human. That is a problem. Like, it's not a problem if you want to be a CEO who goes around hugging trees. It's about your view, your worldview by which you approach it. What is your understanding? What is your ideology? So I think Christians should be the other end of caring for the environment. They should be at the end of thinking through where we buy things, how much we use, all the things about gluttony, greed, all these things tie in and are spoken of in the Bible. And so we should be pursuing looking after the environment, caring for the environment under God as He has commanded it to and as He's laid down instructions for. It becomes too far when you elevate anything in creation above the Creator, or when you elevate things in creation to the same value as humanity, because these are orders that God has set. So if God has set an order that is clear in the Bible, Him, people, and the rest of creation, if you start using arguments that elevate the creation to the level of the Creator, then you've completely then committed what the Bible calls idolatry. Okay, so you've done something seriously wrong. But also, if you lift the rest of creation to the same value as people, okay, you've also committed an error. So I remember this was a number of years back. I remember watching the news, and I was trying to find the clip. I so wanted to play it for you, because this BBC presenter asked someone who was trying to save the whales, and he asked him this one question. It was really, really interesting. He said, everybody's trying to get you money nowadays. I've got £3 that I can give away in the month. Do I give it to save the whales, or do I give it to the NSPC, looking after children? And he said, well, I would say you would give it to the whales. And he said, no, you'd have to say that, wouldn't you, because it's your charity. And he says, no, to say that because there's no intrinsic difference between a whale or a child. Well, that is wrong. That's just clearly wrong. So that person's ideology, I don't think he was claiming to be a Christian. But if you approach that, if you come with that ideology as a Christian, then you've departed from the teaching of the Bible. So I'd want to be on the side of passionately caring about the environment as ordered rightly under the biblical principles.
This is so important because at the end of the day, all of these things come down to your view of reality, the way in which you perceive things, and that then determines how you value your things. So if there is no God, the Christian God, the Jewish Christian or Judeo-Christian God, the picture there, then, and this is all there is, then I cannot see how one can objectively, rationally argue that, say, a rat has any more value, I don't know where you get value from, than, say, a baby. And in fact, the People's Ethical Treatment of Animals, Peter, Ingrid Newkirk, who was head of this, had a saying that a rat is a pig as a boy. A rat is a pig as a boy. They're all of equal value. And so if it's a choice between saving a rat and saving a boy, it's fairly arbitrary. You toss a coin, go for the rat, it may be the boy next time. And that is a natural outflowing of that particular worldview. I don't think you can live it consistently. I don't think it's got much explanatory value. It doesn't really chime in with the way we feel and the way we actually operate, whereas the Christian does. The Christian worldview does. And so the Christian worldview actually commends environmental concern.
I think we've got time for one more question. So, what can individuals do to really make a difference when the main cause of global warming is large corporations?
Okay, well, I guess what Melvin said on the other question is right. You've always got to ask whether the assumption of the question is right. I think from the research I've done, I would agree that it does seem to be large corporations. It's big. The decisions are made by governments and big business. That's where it seems to be at. And I remember someone saying to me that in regards to recycling, they said it's like you run into your bathroom, the hot tap is fully on, the cold tap is fully on, and the plug's in. And the governments keep telling you to get a cup and put some of it down the toilet, but nobody's switching off the taps and pulling out the plug. And we can't do that, only the governments and the big businesses do. So I kind of agree and see where that's coming from. But what I would say is, what can we do, or what can we do? Every person who considers themselves a Christian has handed their life over to Jesus Christ. And as I said in one of the passages of the Bible, it says we are now a new creation in Christ. Like we have this new life, we're a new creation. The old life has gone, that rebellious life that I spoke about has been put behind us, and we're seeking to live for God. And irrespective of what anybody else does, it is now my joy and delight to order my life under the rule of Jesus. And I do that willingly, voluntarily, and with delight, because I know that that is the best way to govern, for my life to be governed, that will bring me the most joy. So there are lots of things that won't necessarily change. Melvin and I are both governors at a local school. Education has gone so far in a direction that I don't think it's possible for Christians ever to pull it back. But the way that I educate my children will not be set by the patterns of what the government has dictated about how you should educate. So everything has gone in such a far direction. You might say of most things, what is the point, or what can Christians really achieve? Well, what I can achieve is what my life is about, is that when I stand before Jesus, he says to me, well done. You acted rightly in regards to the environment. You acted rightly in the way you educated your children. Your attitude towards your pets, whatever it might be, was right. You ordered everything under me. And that is the only call on any individual Christian, whether you have ordered your life rightly under Jesus. But in actual fact, it's a question everybody will have to answer, Christian or not, when we stand before Jesus. How have you ordered your life under me? We're all going to be asked it, and the Christian will give an account for that. And so even if big business or government is going in such a far direction and it would seem like hard to resist, I can still make decisions according to my own conscience, knowing what the Bible teaches about how I operate.
Thank you very much. That's a great point to end on.